Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. Protecting you and your home against all forms of home invasion.
Right, I'm in Bonnie, Scotland, and I'm at the ice. 9/11's alive. With the next venue, which is, as you can see, the Irish Centre in Reading. I'm just leaving Reading now. It's 10 o'clock in the morning and I'm off to the next venue, which is the YMCA, Indian YMCA in London. Now the event last night was a much smaller audience than I've had. I've been getting almost 200 people at some of these events. There was only about 60 people at Reading. They were clearly concerned and about the corruption and the fact that we're not getting any truth in our mainstream media. And I made it clear at the beginning of the talk that I'm highlighting the issues, but I don't have a solution for our corrupt mainstream media and the fact that we don't get real, true investigative journalism or truth in our media. Anyone recognise this chap? This is the Mahatma Gandhi Hall. So we're in London at the Indian YMCA. The atmosphere was different last night to some of the other talks. They were concerned, definitely. Thank you to each and every one of you for coming along this evening, because, as I've said before, I don't get paid to make the TV programmes, but you pay me in these talks, which comes in handy to keep there would be no TV show if it wasn't for that. Okay. Okay, I've split today's talk up into two sections. I'm going to talk about the 9/11 cover-up. I'm going to talk about the media and money. I'm also going to be announcing a £50,000 reward in connection to one of the subjects that I've been covering. We're going to have a 15-minute break. And in part two, I'm going to talk about my new film, which is Almost Identified Flying Objects. Just to point out that I don't stand here because I think I know more than anyone in this audience. I actually stand here because I don't. Many of the issues on Richplanet, an underlying theme which comes up again and again and again is this problem with mainstream media. The fact that mainstream media is controlled by a tiny handful of individuals who have massive power over the whole mainstream media, and they can basically print what they want and get away with it. There's very little truth-seeking in our mainstream media, and which enables them to cover up on all of the issues that I try to expose on the TV show. And I don't have a solution to that. That's why I say I stand here and I don't know everything. I don't have the solution to the criminal mainstream media that we have. But I am seeking one, and I put out as much information as I can so that one day perhaps someone will come up with the solution. And I'm not one of these people who claims there is an awakening. A lot of people are saying this now, but I don't personally see it. I don't see an awakening. I think the solution is yet to come if there's going to be one. I had a normal upbringing. I went to a normal comprehensive school in County Durham. I went to university, I studied engineering, and I worked as an engineer for the best part of 20 years before I got involved in TV. And here's this year's embarrassing photograph. My mother went ballistic when she found I'd got my hair dyed, especially for the graduation photograph. Okay, so I've been covering 9/11 in great detail on the show, and in particular the work of Dr. Judy Wood, former Professor of Engineering and Mechanics, and this is her work Where Did the Towers Go? Now this is 10 years of research. It's the most detailed, comprehensive study of 9/11 evidence in the public domain. I think it's sold approaching 1,000 copies in the UK and 10,000 in the US. I think it's got 125 reviews on Amazon, and 105 give it 5 stars. So this is, as I say, the most comprehensive analysis. And if you compare it to the official line, which is that 2 aluminium tubes caused 2 of the strongest buildings in the world to completely disappear, a preposterous theory that the BBC still have up on their website. Okay, this is from 12:59 Greenwich Mean Time, 13th of September, so within 48 hours of it happening, the BBC think they know why the towers disappeared. Compare that with 10 years of research from a former professor of engineering and mechanics and all of the evidence in this book. There's just no comparison. Now, what this book demonstrates quite clearly is that the towers didn't hit the ground. They turned to dust in midair, and that's proven with several pieces of evidence. It's proven with the seismic data. There was no clatter, which there would have been if the towers were disappeared using bombs or nukes, or indeed planes, if that could actually happen. So, Dr. Judy Wood's conclusions of this book are that the towers were disappeared using covert technology, an energy weapon. Their state was changed in situ, so they were turned to dust in midair. Okay, and as I say, that is proven using lots of different pieces of evidence. And Dr. Wood also looked at the other competing conspiracy theories. All right. So just for those who aren't aware of Dr. Wood, I'm just going to show a very brief clip just to introduce you to a former professor of engineering mechanics. And I'm talking to Dr. Judy Wood about her book, Where Did the Towers Go? Now then, Judy, we were talking about how the towers came down, and
yeah, they didn't come down.
Okay,
that's the key. The towers didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground.
Right.
They turned into dust in midair.
Right. Now, another thing that people who support controlled demolition usually point to, and I've given a lecture on 9/11 in the past, and I had this slide on my screen, you know. So, but I've changed my view on it. Is the cut core columns that, you know, they're not 45 degree, but I don't know what angle they're at. But there's an image in your book which is 207A, which shows a fireman, and he's got a.
I would like to point this picture out.
Mm-hmm.
What column do you cut to produce this effect?
Yeah. I mean, that image says it all, doesn't it? The justification and various of the video of the as you describe it, being peeled like a banana almost. The
in some places
just falling apart. But the 207A shows a firefighter actually with an oxyacetylene equipment next to where the column was cut. So they were rescue workers who were possibly cutting those columns.
These are 700 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
I have a strong feeling that the bottom of those columns is where stairwell B was, where 14 people survived, and they looked up and saw blue sky.
Okay, now it's quite difficult to know how to pitch some of these talks, because people who still think Osama bin Laden was involved, right, some of this might go over your head, all right, and I apologize for that, but there are a lot of people here who watch my show who are aware of the information and who have perhaps seen a lot of this evidence, and this really is about the conspiracy and about the cover-up of 9/11, all right. So if you want to be convinced of what I'm saying, that covert technology was used to destroy the towers or disappear the towers, you would need to go on my website and watch 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of information which is there for you to see free of charge. So classified technology was used to destroy these towers. Now, a major part of the cover-up of that, people think that the cover-up is just the fact that there were no Islamic terrorists, right? That's the cover-up that was given to the mainstream, right? But people such as the people in this audience who said, I don't believe that, right? They had to be managed, right? And they had to be managed to prevent them discovering this hidden technology. And this was the second part of the 9/11 cover-up, to keep the technology that did this hidden. And what this has involved is creating bogus researchers, some of them scientists, and groups to steer those questioning the official narrative towards conventional explanations. So it was done by bombs, or it was done by nukes, or it was done by thermite. And they have been very successful at this. Intelligence agencies are well practiced in setting up fake companies, fake pressure groups, fake websites. They do it all the time. It's their bread and butter. And that's what they've done with the 9/11 Truth Movement. One person who has exposed a lot of this is Andrew Johnson. He's been featured on my show a lot. He got involved quite a few years ago now with some of these groups that contain scientists that were trying to find the truth about 9/11, or he thought they were trying to find the truth about 9/11, because Andrew posted some physics equations on a website and he was asked to join one of these groups. But after a while, he realized that these groups, or the leaders of these groups, were being highly manipulative and were actually keeping people away from the truth. Anyone who spoke of something unconventional or strayed from the bombs in the building or thermite theories. So he's exposed a lot of this in his book 9/11 Finding the Truth. So they have created fake campaign organizations and groups. Now, if you've got involved in one of these, I'm not criticizing people who, because this is extremely subtly done. It's very cleverly orchestrated, all right? So I'm not casting aspersions on anyone who's involved in architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth or any of these groups. But what I'm saying is that I suspect that the people running these groups are bogus. These groups all propagate fake theories which are based on conventional explanations. And just to reiterate, this is not aimed at the masses. This is aimed at the truth movement, people who question things. They always campaign for an investigation or a re-investigation. Now, there's already been an official investigation by NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and that was a complete whitewash. All right, so if they're going to do another investigation, why wouldn't it be a complete whitewash again? Why aren't these groups doing their own investigation, which is what Dr. Judy Wood has done? Why aren't these groups campaigning to have people impeached or arrested? They just campaign for a new investigation. Now, I just need to press this point home about explosives and thermite, because it relates to something which happened in the UK in February this year. In 2007, as long ago as 2007, NIST, that's the National Institute for Standards and Technology, who did the official 9/11 report as to why the towers disappeared, they logged a receipt of a request for correction to their World Trade Center reports by Dr. Judy Wood. This request for correction sets out evidence of one or more directed energy weapons being used to destroy most or all of the World Trade Center complex. So what that is Dr. Judy Wood's read the official report of 9/11 and she's saying, I'm a professor of engineering mechanics, I don't agree with the science in that report, so I'm going to challenge it. Here's my request, put it right please. So they knock it back and say, no, we're not going to introduce those changes into our report. So she then appealed, okay, they knocked that back. Now, the only avenue for a scientist then is to sue the companies who were involved in producing those reports for science fraud, which is what Dr. Judy Wood did in 2007. So she took them to a local court, I think it was the Southern District of New York. The judge kicked that out, mentioning the moon landings or something ridiculous like that. She then paid $5,000 to have it heard at the appeal court, and she then took it to the Supreme Court of the United States. So she took it to every court in the land that she could, and she put her evidence into that court. So she was prepared to sue these companies for their bogus 9/11 report over this, right? Now, interestingly, just a few weeks after she submitted her request for correction, another group did the same. This involved Dr. Stephen Jones, Kevin Ryan and Richard Gage. Now, Dr. Stephen Jones was involved in covering up probably one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century, that of cold fusion. If that had been developed from 1989 when it was discovered into a workable solution, it's possible that we could all be driving cars that you don't need to put petrol in. All right? This was covered up in 1989 by this guy. Richard Gage, who's an architect, he's been going around promoting the bombs in the building thermite theory of 9/11. So they submit their request for correction to the official government report, just a few weeks after Judy Wood. Now, I suspect that they did that just because she did, because they wanted a competing conspiracy theory with her work. Now, just this point about thermite. The word thermite in their research did not appear in their original request for correction. So the point being that they were very, very tentative about mentioning the word thermite. Their request for correction appeal does not mention thermite in the context of their research, but only as an arbitrary example of a hypothetical analogy. They probably did not put it in their request for correction because this in itself would have been fraud. So they weren't saying thermite and explosives did this. They were very tentative at challenging the government line because they didn't want to perjure themselves, or they didn't want to commit fraud themselves. And they didn't take it to court, as Dr. Judy Wood did. They didn't try and sue the government for committing science fraud. Dr. Judy Wood did. They didn't take it to the appeal court and they didn't take it to the Supreme Court. They just submitted a request for correction. It's very important to realise this when you decide who you think is telling the truth here. Now, one person who read Dr. Judy Wood's book and was very interested in it, but was also a member of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, was Abraham Hafiz Rodriguez. He's a medical student. And he was trying to highlight some of the work of Dr. Wood to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now, the leader of that group, the guy whose name I just had up on the screen there, Richard Gage, he started censoring some of Rodriguez's comments about Dr. Wood from the Architects and Engineers website. So he was preventing any sort of discussion about Dr. Judy Wood's work. He wasn't happy about this, so he went along to a talk that Richard Gage, the architect, you've probably, those who watch Edge Media will have seen a lot of Richard Gage's talks on EMTV, hours and hours and hours of, oh, there were bombs in the building, right? In my opinion, he's an agent, okay? So Rodriguez goes to a talk where Gage is speaking to challenge him on this.
I supported this organization and I'm a big fan of it, but I found out there was all this evidence that you weren't talking about. There's evidence such as the New York City seismographic data, the University of Alaska magnetometer data, the New York Police Department forensic study that found only one file cabinet of the thousands. The rest of them were missing. The undamaged bathtub beneath World Trade Center, the trains that were down there, the PATH trains, all this information that's easily verifiable. And I was wondering why you weren't talking about it.
Now, I'm not going to present every piece of evidence out there that I can't explain. What good does that do me or you? What's your next question?
My next question is, why didn't you take all this smoking gun evidence, such as the thermite that's supposedly peer-reviewed, why did you never file that in a court of law, yet Dr. Judy Wood took all the evidence, just a brief sum of that I mentioned.
I'm an architect.
And she filed that in a court of law,
okay,
and it went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in October of 2009. So
okay.
why have you never filed this evidence in a court of law to pursue NIST and the people that engaged with NIST in the conflict of interest relationship to use our tax dollars for those phony 9/11 investigations?
This is an important discussion. I'm just trying to kind of carry it along so others have an opportunity, and I don't want to cut you short. I'm not an attorney.
There's just one more.
I'm not an attorney. We're architects and engineers. We have produced the evidence. It's available for you to file it, to do whatever you want with it, make it happen. I'm working 80 hours a week, harder than I've ever worked in my life. I'm managing a large organization of 40 volunteers with almost no funding, and I don't have time to sleep, much less file lawsuits. I don't even know how to do that. No attorneys have come forward yet and said, here, I want to take your stuff to court. And I would say, please do it, for goodness sakes. Next question.
Okay, last part. I just want to know, do you ban all your members that just message you sharing evidence?
Now, Abraham was banned because he put on his profile information which we find confuses and distracts people from the evidence that we believe is most solid. We don't want every theory out there on our website in people's profiles. So we do censor the profiles. So that's what's going on.
I was completely banned. And I just wanted to say, if anyone really wants an investigation, please read this book. It is the most important book I've ever read in my entire life.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. Protect you, your family and your home against possible future civil unrest. Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk, manufacturers of instant protecting you, your family and your home.
Okay, so I think I've made that point fairly clear. So let's jump forward now, 2013, Horsham, the UK. Some guy called Tony Rook is refusing to pay his TV licence because the BBC have covered up facts about 9/11. Now, I'm not casting aspersions against Tony Rook here. I think he's maybe been manipulated. And I also take my hat off to anyone who refuses to pay their TV licence because mainstream media are telling lies. Good on him. But when I saw this article, I became suspicious of it immediately. So this is in the Mail Online. It's a mainstream article, February this year, and it's saying that this guy is not happy about the BBC's coverage of 9/11. And in the article was this image. I'll come to that in a second. This is at the hearing. There was about 100 people there. This is Tony Rook outside with some of the supporters. There were various groups who were helping to gather support for Tony Rook's case. And this is the image of the poster. It's extremely well designed. There's a lot of work gone into this. So as soon as I saw this, I thought, this is a bit fishy. Remember, 11th of September, thermite treason plot. Now, I've read Dr. Judy Wood's book, and I'm pretty convinced that thermite's a red herring, all right? And we've got 2 little explosions here in the towers, suggesting that the towers were disappeared using bombs. So I was a little bit suspicious of this image. It also looks very well orchestrated. It looks as though these 2 guys who've specifically knelt down in order to stretch the fabric are possibly working in conjunction with the Mail Online photographer. We've got a guy in fancy dress here. This is Tony Rook here, who's refusing to pay his TV license. Okay, so now at the hearing was this guy. They call this guy Ian Henschel, and he runs Reinvestigate 9/11. And before the hearing took place, he was emailing various members of Reinvestigate 9/11 trying to drum up support for the event. And in the email to people who were going to be at the hearing, he states, at least one mainstream media crew will be present. So Henschel knows there's going to be, the Mail Online is going to be there. But Tony is asking activists not to talk to them and not to hold up placards which do not represent his views. Please go to the bottom to see his message in full. He goes on. Activists attending the hearing are asked to make sure any signs represent the message of this campaign, that the BBC has covered up the truth on 9/11. Those with signs saying anything that would appear speculative to a general audience, e.g. 9/11 was an inside job, will be seen as undermining the court case and Tony's campaign. So Henschel's trying to get people not to bring placards, all right? And then this one appears. So I just assumed this must be the official campaign placard, because it's obviously been so well orchestrated. So I wanted to find out who the 2 guys are kneeling down and who the guy is in fancy dress there. Are they part of this campaign? So I put an appeal out on my TV show to try and find the identities of the people holding up this placard. And my show goes out to around about 20,000 people, and of those people, a lot of them are 9/11 truth well, not activists, but people who don't believe the official story on 9/11. Therefore, it's very likely that they would know someone watching my show would know who these men are who've designed this poster. And I put this appeal out a few months ago. Perhaps I am wrong, and the supporters holding up this poster are genuine 9/11 supporters, but simply victims of the lies put out by the thermite body. In order to find out, I would like to appeal to viewers to help identify the men who are featured in this image. If you recognize any of them, please get in touch via the richplanet.net website. So as I say, it should be quite easy to find them, because there's not thousands and thousands of 9/11 truth activists, and I know quite a lot of people who are involved in 9/11 truth. So I only got one email response from that appeal, from Tony Rook. Now, he was a bit annoyed that I was suggesting some sort of double cover-up, and he sort of had a bit of a go at me. So I replied to his email. I said, look, Tony, why aren't you, in your evidence that you're submitting to the court, why aren't you mentioning Dr. Judy Wood? This is the only thing you need to submit to the judge. Why are you talking about bombs in the building? And I also said to him, and do you know who those guys were who you're standing next to holding up the placard? Who were these guys? So Tony Rook replied to me. He said, I don't know who the did what, used what, to do what on 9/11, but I do know the official story stinks. I am very unpopular with a few 9/11 groups because I will not follow Judy Wood, weapons of whatever, or holograms, faked VT, because I do not care. I have no idea who brought the banner, nor do I know the identity of the man in the Guy Fawkes mask. So he's standing here behind the banner, he doesn't know who these guys are, and he doesn't know who's designed the banner. So I thought, well, maybe Henschel's organised this, the guy who was organising support for the whole event. So I emailed Ian Henschel. I said to him, can you tell me who made the poster and who are the people holding it up? Do you know if the people holding up the poster, and in particular the 2 men kneeling down and the person in the mask, can be contacted? He replied, no, I don't know who they are. They asked me what I thought of the poster, and I said personally I did not think a lot of it, but they should ask Tony. I assumed from this picture they had Tony's approval. So I replied to Henschel Thanks for letting me know what happened about the placard. I really would like to trace the men holding up the placard. Is it possible you could email your distribution list and ask them if anyone knows who these strangers at the hearing were? I sent that to Henschel on the 1st of April. He hasn't replied. So it looks like he's not interested in finding out who these guys were. After him telling people not to bring placards, some strangers bring that extremely big placard and he doesn't know who they are. Henschel has written 2 9/11 books, and information about them has appeared in mainstream news. He doesn't mention Dr. Judy Wood, he just points out holes in the official story. In my opinion, this is a psychological operation, folks. What I think is going on here is they've decided to introduce some 9/11 research into the mainstream, because this is Mail Online, remember, this is mainstream newspaper, but they've wanted to introduce information that they can disprove at some point in the future. Thermite. Ian Henschel here, who, as I said, runs Reinvestigate 9/11, said, Andrew Johnson is personally the biggest single cause of the collapse of the 9/11 truth movement in the UK. And Andrew Johnson has been supporting Dr. Judy Wood's work for years now. So I think it's time.
Bullshit detected. Take precautions.
Henschel's father worked for MI5. His mother also worked for British intelligence. I don't know him, but I know someone who knows him. A reliable source informs me that he's a highly manipulative individual. So, who are these guys? I want to know who they are, and I've been asking every audience that I've been speaking in front of on this tour. Have these two guys just been along to Primark and bought some 9/11 truth clothes for the day? This one's got quite a prominent nose. No one recognised them? Okay, we come on to 7/7, another fake terrorist incident. This man, on the day of 7/7, 2005, the London bombings, went on national television and radio and said that his company, Visor Consultants, were in the process of carrying out a terrorist training exercise at the 3 tube stations where the actual terrorist bombs exploded, and at the same times. That's what he said. Immediately he said that on national radio and television, he should have been arrested. Anyone with half a brain would have to say that. He's saying that his company were at the 3 same tube stations at the same time the actual terrorist bombs went off, and he was organising a terror drill there. He should have been. I'm not saying that Peter Power was in on it. I think he was probably duped, but he should have been arrested. His property should have been seized, his computers should have been seized, and they should have extracted information to find out who really planned that drill, because that would take you to the people who've planted the bombs. Okay, but they didn't do that. They let him off. And this is just one smoking gun of the 7/7 evidence. A lot of it pointed out in Dr. Nick Collestrom's book, Behind the Veil of 7/7. But this isn't a lecture about 7/7. You can watch interviews with Dr. Nick Collestrom on my website, and there are many, many holes in the official story which tell you that it was a fake orchestrated event. Okay, and I've been trying to bring awareness of this to MPs. I went to see my MP and he wasn't aware of any of the holes in the official story. He just completely bought the official government line. Didn't know any of it. Didn't even realise there was campaigns or anything. So I give him some documents, 40 odd pages of key information that MPs should be aware of, and I'm asking people to go on my website, download those documents. So if you click on this link here, I've got a list of all of the MPs, and it tells you which MPs have been given the information. If your MP hasn't, please print out the documents. As I say, it's about 40 odd pages. Book an appointment to go and see your MP and just give them the documents. Now, I've only managed to get, I think it's 7, it's a lot more now, it's maybe approaching 100 MPs have had this information, and I have been getting letters back from them, and some of them just show complete pathological denial. What it seems to me is they're seeing the information, they're not really studying it, and they're making a political decision. They're saying to themselves, whoa, if I go down this avenue, I'm going to be out of a job, right? So they're just making a political decision. None of them have got any balls. None of them actually want to see the truth. But the first phase, if you like, of my campaign is to get all of the MPs those documents, because if they've been given the documents at some future point in time, when the truth does come out, then they can't claim ignorance. That's what I want to do. So once we've got all of the MPs that information, it might come to light that some of them are a bit more sympathetic to it than others, and then we can take it on to another phase. That's my logic behind it. So do help out and do go on the website and see if your MP hasn't had the documents. Okay, so what will it take to bring about real change in our media and get some truth about these subjects, some truth about 7/7 or 9/11 or any of the other things that they're lying about? Now, when I started making my TV show, I was a little bit naive. I would get someone on the show that would not be allowed on mainstream, and I would think to myself, wow, that was good evidence. That's going to go much further than Richplanet. That's going to end up somewhere big. Nothing would happen. Then I'd get someone else on the show with what I considered, better information. Would go nowhere. And it would happen again. I've actually come to the conclusion that I could have George Bush sitting on my sofa, right, saying 9/11 was an inside job, and it wouldn't even get in the mainstream. They seem to have this barrier. If we just call this the independent media, which is what I'm involved with, I call it independent media, not alternative media. They've got this barrier that nothing is allowed in. Mainstream media would be BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5, Sky, and all of your main newspapers. So what does it take to get information from the independent media, from independent researchers, into the mainstream? It's extremely difficult, but it does occur on limited occasions. It occurs if the story is a psychological operation or contrived from the outset. So they'll plant a story in alternative media, independent media, knowing that they're going to take it on. And this is what happened with the Horsham thing that I've just explained. Another example was, anyone remember the G4S scandal? They were saying, oh, the Olympics aren't secure enough because G4S are crap. Remember that? I didn't buy any of that rubbish. If you think about the Olympics for a moment. You've got dozens and dozens of venues, you've got thousands and thousands of competitors. Each of those competitors from every country in the world have got accommodation, right? You've got millions of spectators. How could you possibly militarily make such an event secure like that? It's like saying, I don't think Christmas is going to be very secure this year. A bit worried about Christmas. We need more security for Christmas. Do you see where I'm coming from? It's just preposterous to think that you could make that secure. So that broke in the independent media. I think it was on the Tony Gosling show, and then it got into mainstream media. So why would they do that? Well, maybe they were planning a contrived fake event and they were just preparing everyone's mind to accept it with this G4S bogus story. Another example where information gets from independent media into the mainstream is if the information's been used for the purposes of ridicule. So we saw this with conspiracy files. So they'll cherry pick information from 7/7 Ripple Effect and other documentaries purely to ridicule it. Now, a good example of a story which didn't get into mainstream, which should have, was on Theo Chalmers' show a couple of years back. This broke in the alternative media. I think it's been on Press TV. David Cameron in 1989, when he was a junior researcher for the Conservative Party, he went to South Africa on behalf of a British company which involved various high-ranking Conservatives using taxpayers' money to purchase 3 nuclear weapons, because the South African government were going through a change at that time and they didn't want to leave these weapons in the hands of the black government that were going to take over. So he was involved in a sale of those weapons. They ended up in Oman and they went missing. Dr. David Kelly was also involved in this transaction. So David Cameron was responsible for 3 nuclear weapons going missing. Now, an act was passed in 1998 which states that anyone involved in an arms deal where either a weapon is tested or let off would get a life sentence. So this is a story which potentially in the future could get David Cameron a life sentence because he was involved in this dodgy arms deal and money was siphoned off to the Conservative Party in this deal. It didn't even get in any mainstream publication. There was an example last year that I spoke about, the Tariq al-Hashimi story. This is the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq who was going around Iraq a couple of years back with a murder squad, murdering people in the Iraqi government. He murdered people in the Iraqi army, Iraqi police, foreign ministers. So he's murdering all these people, and then he fled to Turkey. So that's like Nick Clegg going around the UK with a murder squad, killing people in the government. And it didn't even get on the news. So they've kept that out of the mainstream because they don't want people Well, the story that they're selling is that this is all of the murders in Iraq is carried out by Al-Qaeda or extremists or insurgents or whatever word you want to choose. They don't want people to know that the Iraqi government, which was installed by the West, is carrying out such atrocities. So they've got completely tight control over the mainstream media. They can, as I said at the very beginning, they're extremely confident that they've got control over people's minds.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. InstaShield for your quick, simple home protection. Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. At last, home protection that really works.
So people say, well, surely the answer to this information problem that we're not being given the truth is the internet. And I do think we have to protect the freedoms of the internet, but I'm just going to point out where people are getting their information from on the internet. My website gets about 1,700 visitors a day. That's about 50,000 a month. Now, other websites, such as, say, the David Icke website, will get a lot more visitors per day than me, right? But let's just compare my website with mainstream. The Mail Online hits 56 million web users. This is from 2011. Mail Online expanded its lead on other UK national newspaper websites in January, pulling in a monthly total of 56 million users, according to the latest report. Average daily browsers 3.1 million. The Guardian 2.3 million. The Independent 5.6 million. So for every person looking at my website each day, there's 1,850 looking at Mail Online website. And if you factor in the BBC website and the other mainstream websites, it's well over 5,000. So for every person going on independent media, there's 5,000. They're still staying on mainstream sources, even though they're going to the internet. And this is because they've pumped so much money into it. The BBC spends £145 million a year just on its website. That's not on TV, just on its website. That's nearly £400,000 a day. How can somebody like me or other independent media organisations compete with that? So they've still got people's minds locked into the mainstream propaganda. Now, another very important arm of their propaganda is print media. And of course, it will be impossible for me to have, on the end, you go into the newsagents, to have Richplanet News here. How could you possibly get that? They've got control of this. And it's probably one of the most entertaining parts of my day. I go in the co-op each morning and just stand in front of the newspaper stand. It's very entertaining. It's just hilarious what they come up with. But some people say that the headline is very important because that's what sells the newspaper. I don't actually agree with that, because I think that people who ultimately control newspapers, money is just a means to an end, as I will explain in a minute. And it's the information and control of people's minds that they're interested in. Because let's just say 2 million people buy that Mail newspaper. If 2 million people buy that, these are in such prominent positions in garage forecourts and in supermarkets that maybe over 10 million people will read the headline. Because you can buy a story without actually buying the newspaper. This is why I think the positioning of these newspaper racks of, as I say, newspapers are extremely important for their propaganda. And all they need to do on the front of the page is just put Islamic terror plot, and then that's gone straight in your subconscious. So I still think that the printed media is an extremely important wing of their propaganda. And how can an independent compete with that? How could anyone, unless they've got millions and millions of pounds, put a competing publication on there? Okay, so people say to me, why don't you get Richplanet on mainstream? We want to see you on mainstream TV. Well, I'd love to, but there's an overriding problem. I have been contacted by 2 or 3. Discovery Channel wanted to make a UFO thing. ITN contacted me. There was the road trip, UFO road trip. They contacted me. I just ignored them. But what has happened is I'll say to them, well, can I see a copy of your program proposal that you want me to take part in? And I want to see the finished piece before it goes out. I want to have a final say. And they'll just say, oh, well, we don't do that. That's not how we work. And I'll say, well, F off, rouse. What, you're just going to take my stuff, mess with it and put it out and make a fool of me and not let me see the finished thing? That's how they operate, though. And they've done that with lots of people that I know who've got involved in mainstream documentaries. Everyone who I know has regretted it, right? So hence I've never got involved, and this is the problem. If someone on my show says to me, Richard, can I see what you're going to put out? I'll give them a copy of it. I'll say, yeah, sure. And if they're not happy with part of it or all of it, I'll say, well, what aren't you happy with? And then we'll have a discussion. I'll say, yeah, okay, you've got a point there. I'll edit that bit or change this. So I'm quite happy. But generally that's not necessary, because I just put out whatever it is that they're saying. I don't mess with it. I'm trying to report the truth. But they have this policy in mainstream that they will not let anyone see a finished program, because they're worried that the person will start taking control of it. But to me, they should do that. Okay. Now, one thing that they use in the mainstream, I call it the phony bone of contention, in order to spin their lies. And I've actually come up with a couple of definitions for the phony bone of contention. Controversy and discussion over two seemingly opposing viewpoints is encouraged in order to divert attention away from a third viewpoint which is being concealed. Okay, and I'm going to give an example of this. The other flavour of the phony bone of contention is that controversy and discussion over two seemingly opposing viewpoints is encouraged in order to reinforce credibility of a subtextual issue which is itself a fake construct. So we're seeing this second one in 7-7 all the time. There's lots of stories that have 7-7 as the subtext, but they're not specifically talking about 7-7 or the evidence. So an example would be Lisa French has started campaigning against mental health cutbacks. She was on the bus that blew up in 7-7 and had treatment for her post-traumatic stress disorder. So she's saying, isn't it terrible that the government are cutting back? So they've created contention about government cutbacks, and they're constantly reminding people 7-7 was done by terrorists by having her on the news, without actually having to be challenged on the evidence of that. And there's been loads of stories about 7-7 that aren't discussing the evidence, but there's some other issue that they're reminding people that 7-7 was a real event when actually it was a fake construct. So the first one, one program which makes very good use of the phony bone of contention is Question Time, or questionable Time, with the completely disgusting David Dimbleby. He's not there chairing an open and honest debate. He is there to make sure that the phony issues are stayed on. He's there to make sure that the real answers are not discussed. So I've got an example here of a question from Question Time. So let's just have a look at this question.
Thank you. Our first question is from Lindsay Johnson, please.
Should we applaud the Chancellor for his steadfastness, or should we decry him for his stubbornness?
Good question.
Is it? Let's just have a look at it. Should we applaud the Chancellor for his steadfastness, or should we decry him for his stubbornness? Now that question's been flowered up a little bit, but I'm going to explain exactly what the questioner means. By steadfastness, they mean austerity measures, because the Chancellor is supposedly introducing austerity, so he's increasing taxes and he's cutting back on government spending. So that's what they mean by steadfastness, austerity measures. Decry him for his stubbornness, what that means is some people are wanting him to borrow more money and inject that into the economy in order to try and stimulate growth. So he's being stubborn because he's refusing to borrow more money. And that's it. They're the only two solutions to the economy that they're going to have in that discussion. They're going to have austerity measures or more borrowing. Which do you want? Which do you want to choose? You can have austerity measures or borrowing, and that's your lot. You can't have any more debate about other solutions to the economic problems. What should the questioner have asked if this was a proper debate? How about, what does the panel think could be done to address the current financial situation? The original question limits the debate to two possible alternatives, neither of which provide a real solution to the problem. Austerity measures bleed you dry. More borrowing just gets you further into debt. Neither of those are solutions to the economic problems, in my opinion. I'll just give you a simple analogy. It's not a perfect one, but it's the best I could think of. Let's say I'm a taxi driver and my car's only getting 10 miles to the gallon, right? But I work out that I'm still making a profit. So I think to myself, right, I know what I'll do. I can work 18 hours a day and I'll just make enough to live. And I think, no, what I'll do is I'll just work on Sundays, but I'll work 24 hours a day because I get double time. and I'll make more on a Sunday. And they're the two options. And I ponder over them and argue over them. What's the real solution? The real solution is to get rid of the car, get a new taxi, and it's the same with the economy. The economic issues are systemic. They're system problems. They're a problem with the current system. So you can't solve them by pumping money in or borrowing money or tax spend. It's a systemic problem which has been around for centuries. Okay? So what is being concealed in such a debate? Because this is what phony bones of contention do. They conceal the real solution. Okay? Now, the real solution to the economic issues is a lecture in itself. Okay? But just to summarise, to end fractional reserve banking and usury, and to allow governments to issue currency debt-free. That's it in a nutshell, okay? But they would never discuss that on a programme like Question Time. But there's actually a second thing which is being concealed. Because the solution is reasonably simple to the economic debt that we're in, right? It's written there, right? That leads you to another thing that they're concealing, which is that the debt isn't an accident. It's not an accident, in my opinion. It's been done deliberately. If you put someone in debt, whether it be a company or a country or an individual, you're not necessarily putting them in debt because you want that money back. You might be putting them in debt to permanently disempower them and control them, right? So I don't think the debt is an accident. I think it's a control mechanism. But they would never allow any individual on Question Time to actually express that view, because the people who ultimately control the banking system decide who gets on Question Time. Now, another thing that they keep going on about is we need, and all parties say this, all parties come up with this, even the Green Party. Economic growth is good and we need to try and increase GDP to get out of debt. Really? So we need to consume more stuff and that's going to get us out of debt? Does that sound right to you? It's a bit like saying if you have a company, because GDP is equivalent to turnover in a company, if you increase a company's turnover, will it automatically make more profit so it could pay off debt? Not necessarily. And there's another flaw in this argument, which is that, let's say that you did increase GDP, so you've got more wealth and you print more money to represent that wealth. Well, you can only use that money to pay off debt if the money is printed debt-free, so it doesn't have to be paid back. But when they issue it as a loan. So there's flaws in this statement. But again, there's something a lot more sinister behind this statement, and it was pointed out by Zbigniew Brzezinski in his 1969 book, Between Two Ages. Now, this guy is still an advisor to Barack Obama, and he's been an advisor to other American presidents. And in '69 he said, "The challenge for governments in the future will be to prevent man from effectively discovering his true self and keeping humanity locked into consumerist materialism." What the flippin' heck is he talking about? Preventing man from effectively discovering his true self. Well, I'm going to try and explain what Brzezinski's talking about with an economics lesson, but it's an economics lesson you will not see in any school, because it's an economics lesson without reference to the word money, okay? Because money is just a means to an end. Money is like the oil in an engine. It goes round and round and round and round. If you're just watching the oil in an engine, you don't know where the car's going. You don't know the purpose of the journey or the agenda for that journey. That's all money is. It's a means to an end. So remove money out of the equation, and then let's have a look at the economics. Okay, what's more important than money in an economy? Well, I would suggest time is very important. This blue bar represents the amount of time that you've got in any one particular week. So you can split that up into your work time and your free time. Now, what else is important in an economy? Well, I've just called it stuff. Okay, you go to work to get your stuff. All right. Now, we can split stuff up into stuff that you need and stuff that you want. Stuff that you need is stuff that if you didn't have, you might die. So food, clean water, shelter, clothing perhaps. Stuff that you want is all of the luxury goods that we love and crave. iPads, fast cars, you name it. Sky football, the list is endless and growing. Now, you can split work up into the amount of time it would take you to get the stuff that you need and the amount of time it would take you to work to get the stuff that you want. Alright? I've also split the free time up into consumption, because if we're consuming all of this stuff, we need time to consume it. We need time to watch our Sky football or whatever it is that we're doing. And then there's our free time. This is very important. Free time where you will learn, or you will become political, or you will be critical. This is where you'll, as Brzezinski says, discover who you truly are. Now, let's go back 600 years and draw the chart for a typical person, because it would look very different to that. And just to point out that in the modern age, really, probably only 10% of our time is actually spent working for the stuff that we need. If you actually list all of the products consumed in any one year, less than 10% are stuff that keep you alive. Okay, so let's go back before the Industrial Revolution. It's going to look more like this. So the vast majority of people's time will be spent to get the stuff that they need to live. And they would spend very little time actually on luxury goods. So let's just say we could go back in time and speak to them. And we say to them, hey, it's great in the future because we only spend 10% of our time to get all the stuff that we need. And the person in the past would say, really? Must be great in the future. You must have loads of free time on your hand. And we'd scratch our head and say, well, no, we haven't actually. Why is that? Strange. Well, it's because the stuff that we want has been mushroomed out of all proportion. Needs have been created which didn't exist in the past. All of the consumption that we have that isn't really necessary. I was in a shop the other day and I said to the woman behind the counter, this shop should be called Things I Can Live Without. It wasn't my idea to go in the shop, by the way. I was dragged there. Anyway, so this is what Brzezinski's talking about. Because what Brzezinski sees as the threat is he doesn't want this box to grow. Because if you spend less time working, you're going to have lots of free time on your hand to discover who you truly are. So he says, let's keep everyone running around, working, and in order to do that, we need to keep them consuming. All right? Now, just a word about debt. Debt occurs in our model here when the amount of things that you want exceeds the amount of work time required to obtain it. And a lot of people fall into personal debt. It's so easy these days. And getting someone in personal debt is a great way of keeping them, as Zabinski says, locked into consumerist materialism. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, and this is what marketing has done. This is sales and marketing that make people want things that they don't really need. Maybe. Bill Hicks once said, anyone here working sales and marketing? Kill yourself. I would only partly agree with him because I actually think the way marketing works is that it makes people feel dissatisfied with the amount and value of stuff that they have, yeah? So that they want something better. I would argue that practically every show on TV does that. They don't need marketing. It makes you feel dissatisfied with your house. That's what TV does. It makes you feel dissatisfied with what's in your house. It makes you feel dissatisfied with the car that you drive. It makes you feel dissatisfied with the food that you eat. Makes you feel dissatisfied that you're not a pop star. Makes you feel dissatisfied you're not an executive. Makes you feel dissatisfied you're not an entrepreneur. How many programs on TV actually work on making you feel content with what you can realistically achieve and celebrating that? I can't think of any. They all psychologically make you want more. And this is what Zbigniew Brzezinski was talking about. So, the statement that all political parties come out with, economic growth is good and we should all try and increase GDP, really? Really? If you want to permanently enslave yourself purely for the purposes of unbridled consumption, then that statement is true. But I don't want to do that because I want some free time to discover who I truly am. Now, you might be sitting there a bit smug saying, well, he's not talking about me here because I haven't got any debt. I live well within my means. Well, they've thought about people like you. Because there are 30 million taxpayers in the UK. And the current debt, took me a while to get these notes right, the current government debt is 1.4 trillion. Now that's a bit of a misnomer, government debt. What that is taxpayer debt. Because the government's going to get it from taxpayers. UK taxpayer debt is 1.4 trillion. So if you divide 30 million into 1.4 trillion, you get just under £47,000 each. Right? So that's debt. That's your debt that the government's holding on your behalf. Right? So if you haven't got that much spare, then you're in debt as well. And remember, it's not an accident. In my opinion, it's not an accident. It's a control mechanism. So why are they doing this? Why are they pushing national governments? And all national governments seem to have debt. Personal debt, I think it's a control mechanism. I don't like to try and predict what they're trying to do because they don't invite me to their tea parties, right? These people who orchestrate this, but I'm pretty certain that it is orchestrated, it's deliberate. We might see whole countries going bankrupt so that they can then be taken into a more central political structure, the New World Order that people talk about. That's perhaps what's going on here. But as I say, you won't see someone on Question Time actually make the statement that it's all deliberate. It's not accidental economic cycles that create the debt. I don't buy that for 1 second.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. InstaShield, protecting your most valuable assets. Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. Protecting you and your home against all forms of home invasion.
I've been covering a little bit on this issue, just to change the subject, the shooting of PC David Rathband. Now, this was a copper a few years back who got shot in the face with a sawn-off shotgun twice, close range, and he's miraculously survived. It's incredible. Now, but I don't think the mainstream media told the truth about this case, and I've been trying to find out information about it. Because Lisa French here, pictured, she was on the number 30 bus in 2005 involved in the London bombings, which blew up. Now, her testimony at the government inquest in 2011, in my opinion, was extremely dubious, because nobody on that number 30 bus saw Hasib Hussein, the supposed terrorist. That's because he wasn't on the bus, right? I've met the guy's dad, okay? We don't know how he died, but he wasn't on the bus. There wasn't a single witness saw him, described him. 6'4" Asian guy, right? So no reliable witness sightings of Hasib Hussein on the bus. Until 2011, 5.5 years after the London bombings, Lisa French at the inquest says that she saw him. And there's no record of her saying this at all previous to that. So she's an extremely important witness who is propping up, in my opinion, propping up the government's fake story that Hasib Hussein blew that bus up. All right? She was dating PC David Rathband, who got shot in the face twice by Raoul Moat. Now, why is that suspicious? Well, the timing is interesting because they were preparing this inquest in the summer, or just before the summer of 2010, right? And that's when Rathband got shot in the face. Right, so if and Lisa French here was under a psychologist, she was getting rapid eye movement therapy, she was being asked to relive the trauma in order to try and deal with it, all right? So I think they've possibly messed with her as a witness to get her to say the right thing to support the government, and Rathband maybe knew all this. I don't know this is the case, but I'm trying to find out more information on it. And the key thing in this case is when they met, because the mainstream media have claimed they met a year after he was shot, that they met on Twitter, right? And he's blinded and disfigured. I suspect he was seeing her before he got shot, okay? And I've got good reason to think that. So if I can prove that, I can prove that all the mainstream media have lied about the timing of when they met, and then that brings this motive really clear. So I've done quite a lot of research since my last talk on this, and nothing I've found out so far contradicts the theory that Raoul Moat was possibly a Manchurian candidate programmed to kill him. Okay. Now, the other issue that I've been covering in a lot of detail are These two guys are historians, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett. Now, you could stand here for a week to present all of their research. Okay, they've looked into the history of King Arthur and other ancient sites in the UK, and in my opinion, there's no doubt in my mind that they have found the resting site of the legendary King Arthur with the artefacts that they found at this dig that they had in 1990. But for some reason, the establishment have been trying to, well, they've been trying to murder them, they've been trying to intimidate them, they've been trying to discredit them, and all the information is on the website and in the TV shows that have recorded them. And in 2011, something was put under Baron Blackett's bed, which exploded and nearly killed him. Right, so he was in a coma for 12 days. But the police have just swept this under the carpet. All right, and they'd have complained to the police because they haven't investigated it properly. The IPCC have been involved, and I've read that report, and it's just a joke. So a supporter is offering a reward of £50,000 for any information which leads to the conviction for the attempted murder of Baron Blackett on Sunday the 14th of August 2011. So I will be announcing that on the show, and so hopefully we might get a few people to come out of the woodwork with this, with some new evidence. Okay, so after the break, as I said, I'm going to be talking about Almost Identified Flying Objects, my new film. So we'll reconvene at maybe 10 to 9, but thanks for listening to part 1. Thank you. Okay, right, I've opened these doors because it was a bit warm. Do people want me to close them? Or who wants to close them? Put their hands up. Who wants them left open? I'll close one of them. Right. Okay. Right. Okay, as I said, people submit UFO reports to me because this is a subject that I've been covering for a few years now, and I've collected 350 reports. And I contacted quite a lot of people who sent me these reports. I've interviewed some of them on camera, and this film is a result of that. There's quite a lot of background information as well in this talk, historical stuff which backs up what's happening in the present day. Now, I put information about this film that I was releasing on my website on, I think it was the 10th of May, and just 4 days later there was an article appeared in Mail Online. Now, what I said in the blurb of the film is that the film shows without any doubt that there are silent aerial vehicles triangular in shape, which are black, which have been seen all over the UK, and they're not being flown from UK military bases. Right? That's what I said in the write-up. So 4 days after I've put that on my website, this article appears in Mail Online. Now, one thing to point out about mainstream media articles which feature military hardware, they're not written by the Mail Online. It doesn't work like that. I know this from somebody who has had information published in mainstream, and they told me that an article like this will have been ordered by the Ministry of Defence or someone in the military. Okay, so this isn't a mainstream journalist who's found out about this secret aircraft and decides to expose it. It doesn't work like that. Mainstream wouldn't print anything on military hardware for fear of contravening a D notice, right? So the point being, the military want the public to know this information. So this article, it contains 16 images. They decided they needed 16 images, and these were big images. I've shrunk them all down, of this strange shaped stealth aircraft which can be launched from an aircraft carrier. Ooh. So implying that it's not landing at military bases, and it's shaped a bit like a triangle. So this is 4 days after I've said that triangle craft are in our skies. So yeah, you know where I'm going with that. Now, it's to me, I think they've put this out just to muddy the waters a little bit. But do notice, the guys on the aircraft carrier, they've got these great big earmuffs on. And the reason why they've got them on is because this is using a jet engine, right? And the vast, vast majority of people who've seen flying triangles, they're completely silent. Okay. Last year I said on the show that I heard that Prince Philip has a closet interest in UFOs, so a Richplanet viewer decided to write to him and ask him whether he did, and he actually wrote back. So this is from Prince Philip's aide, Captain Richard Hutton, and it says, His Royal Highness continues to keep an open mind on the subject of UFOs. So he's not the only person in high place that keeps an open mind on UFOs. Okay, so when somebody submits a report to me, they have to fill in all of these fields which describe what they saw, how fast the object was moving, how they felt about it, how big was it, what direction was it headed, the date, time, etc. All of the information. So I can capture all of the information and produce a report like this one. And as I say, I've got 350 reports from the last 2.5 years. Now, the most controversial element of the UFO subject is whether or not some UFOs that are seen in the sky are from a non-human origin. Some say extraterrestrial origin. And this is the sort of ridicule factor that comes in when people suggest that they could be. And the main argument that people use who say there's no way extraterrestrials could have come here is they say, well, the speed of light is too slow for an alien race to get from another star to us in time. They come up with arguments such as that. Well, I think that's quite a weak argument because it assumes that we know everything about physics and the universe, which we don't. It also assumes that there are not places closer where extraterrestrials may be, such as underground or in other parts of the solar system. But the main thing that people who haven't read or bothered to investigate the subject of UFOs miss is that it's possible that some UFO craft are the result of some kind of collaboration which has already taken place. And the testimony that a secret group, at least in the United States, at some point from 1947 onwards, was collaborating is quite extensive. I would point people to these 3 books. The first, written by Lieutenant Philip J. Corso. He worked on a secret project to do with the Roswell craft. This was a flying disc which was recovered in the desert in New Mexico in 1947. He led a team that was trying to decipher how it worked and also to try and introduce some of the technology of that flying saucer into the military-industrial complex. It's a very detailed book and he's a highly credible guy. Okay, the next book contains testimony from someone called Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar, some say, is a controversial character. I suspect Lazar's testimony is well, let's say at least part true. And he claims that he worked at an area called S4 near the infamous Area 51. And in 1989 he stated that the US had 9 flying saucers that they were trying to decipher their propulsion systems, and he worked on one of them. His information has been corroborated quite recently by someone who worked for the CIA and was sent to S4 under orders from President Eisenhower. The third book, this is by Dan Sherman, who also worked for the US, well, he worked for the US Air Force, and he was drafted into a top secret NSA project. Now the NSA is equivalent to our GCHQ, which deal with top secret communications. They deal with looking at radar information, this kind of thing. And the project that he claims he was involved with involved intuitive communications. So he was taken to this secret base, he was given a second secret job, and he was put in front of a computer screen. It's all detailed in his book. And a line was put on the computer screen, and he was played a tone through these headphones. And he had to mentally hum this tone, and eventually he could move the line up and down the screen. Then another line was put on the screen using another tone. So he could independently control all these lines on the screen, even though he wasn't connected to it, because there was a device which was reading his mind and moving these lines on the screen. And eventually he was able to learn this language, which he described as intuitive communications. Now he said that the technology to be able to do this came from some outside group that the NSA had been collaborating with. And I spent the day with him last year. I met him at the Exopolitics conference. He's the most straight-laced guy you'll ever meet, and his story is extremely detailed. He's a very difficult person to say that he's made it up, in my opinion. So he's claiming that from 1961 they were running abduction programs that the NSA were being informed of, right? So it's in some way joint, all right? And you can watch that full interview from my website. So, as I say, don't forget that when you see a UFO, it's possible that it belongs in that category, that it's perhaps some human craft which is using outside technology, or maybe it is an alien ship which has been facilitated by our own NSA or military. But as a matter of fact, I'm not bothered where your belief lies. I'm happy for people to think that there's no way outside entities could be controlling things in our skies. If you want to think they're all military and they're all human, that's absolutely fine, okay? Or if you want to think that a lot of them are just alien ship, that's fine. Because it doesn't matter. Because what I'm going to present to you will show, beyond any doubt, that there are silent black triangles in our skies that seem to defy our laws of physics, that is being covered up. All right? And the testimony will prove that later on in today's talk. So regardless of your belief as to where or who is controlling them, you need to be aware of it, because it's being covered up. Okay. Now, we also need to point out secret aircraft that have been developed, and one person who has spoken a lot about the secret aircraft that have been declassified is Michael Schratt. You can watch some of his lectures online, and he speaks about, as I say, declassified craft that were developed by Lockheed Skunk Works, and some of the craft that he describes are incredible. So this is 1980s technology. One of them he describes is called the TAV. Can go in a low Earth orbit. It can orbit the Earth 3 times without refueling, and can go from Los Angeles to Melbourne in 55 minutes. Right, and that's been declassified and admitted to. The one on this collection of craft here, this one, that's the TR-3B, that's an alleged secret craft. And I think this one it's an artist's impression of a secret craft, the Aurora, which crashed at Boscombe Down in 1994, but the rest of them are stuff that have either prototypes that have been developed. Okay. So when people see a UFO, often the response from a skeptic will be, yeah, well, that was just a secret aircraft. And then the witness will often say, no, they wouldn't be flying one over the UK. Well, we need to point out they do fly secret US craft over the UK, because, as I said, one of them crashed in 1994 at Boscombe Down. This article says that the US spy plane crashed and may be kept under wraps. A top secret US United States spy plane, which flies at the edge of space at 5 times the speed of sound, crashed at the British Experimental Airbase of Boscombe Down, Hampshire, in 1994. So the SAS were sent out, they put a cordon over it, and then a big transporter plane came, shipped into there, and it was shipped back off to the US. It's believed to have been the Astra or Aurora craft. The US military don't even admit that this craft actually exists. But one of them definitely crashed at Boscombe Down. So we know that they do fly secret experimental aircraft over the UK and also over Germany. In 1989 there was another crash of a secret aircraft. And listen to what Michael Schratt says about some of the characteristics of this one. So this is an aircraft that hasn't been admitted to, but people got sight of it because it had crashed.
The only known illustration of a top secret aircraft that crashed in the East German border region during the first month of the Bush Senior administration. Had a crew of 2 that sat tandem. Now I'm proposing that this was a Lockheed design just for the fact that you can see the same faceted flat plate technology used on the F-117. It had 3 balls. There were 2 up front, 1 in the aft section. And when this particular aircraft crashed, that you'll see right here, there was a hull breach on the port side, and then near the aft section of the hull there was a crack or bent at about a 15-degree angle. One of these balls popped out, was later recovered by crew. It had the consistency of a pineapple or a seashell, and there was a interesting gold braid embedded into these balls. And when these gentlemen recovered one of these spheres and they put this box around it, this box actually popped up on its own. So it had some residual effects still going on.
So interesting there, this craft has 3 balls embedded in the corners of the triangle that produce some residual effect. And that might be relevant to something I'm going to explain a little bit later.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. Protect you, your family and your home against possible future civil unrest. Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk, manufacturers of Instant, protecting you, your family and your home.
Triangle sightings, I've got about 40 black triangle sightings, and we're going to be looking mainly at those today. The large black triangle, typically people say it's as big as a football pitch, and you're going to see the testimonies in a moment. They do seem to come in smaller varieties ranging from 30 feet up to 100 feet. So the black triangle UFO, this is a typical artist's impression of what people see, and the gentleman's just come up to me with an artist's impression of what he saw, and it's almost identical to this. He's done his own artist's impression, he's seen one of these craft. As I say, they have 3 lights in the corners, they have often the light in the middle, and witnesses will always describe them as being silent, sometimes a low humming sound, but certainly not engine noises or propellers. Okay. Now, the earliest case that I have in my files is from 1976, and they do seem to have become prevalent since the late 70s, with the 1981 Hudson Valley flap, which was in New York State. Lots of people saw huge black triangles with coloured lights underneath them hovering above houses and roads, and there's films being made about this incident. Skipping forward to 1990 in Belgium, the Belgian Air Force picked up these triangular objects on radar, and this is an actual photograph of one of them. And these are witness drawings, people who saw these craft in Belgium. So they sent out F-16 fighters to try and intercept these objects, triangular craft, and they couldn't catch them. They were chasing them for days, they were outmaneuvered every time. Now, what happened after the flap died down, the Belgian Air Force were completely perplexed at this. They didn't know the origin of these craft, and they could outmaneuver F-16 fighters. So they took the airborne radar tapes that had tracked these objects, and they gave them to this guy, Professor Emil Schweitzer, who was one of Belgium's leading radar experts. He examined the data, and he concluded that these were real objects that the F-16s were fighting, they were tracking, and that they weren't radar anomalies of any kind. So he had analysis done on the data, and he describes, I've got the full video of Schweitzer explaining this. Some of it's in the film. At one point he says that the triangle's moving along horizontally like this, and it pulls a corner and goes straight up, and at that point of the corner it pulls an acceleration of 30 G. So if anyone was in that craft, they'd be dead, and it would shake most aircraft apart if it was to move in that fashion. It goes straight up, and then it does an almost 180-degree U-turn, and then it comes straight down to the ground at 900 knots. Okay. Now, the British Ministry of Defence requested Schweitzer come to the UK and give them a briefing on the dynamics of these triangles. All right, and this was found out because a researcher called Harry Harris, who was a prominent UFO researcher in the UK in 1991, he found out which hotel he was staying at when he was over in the UK to give this MOD briefing. So he managed to get an interview with him. It's on a camcorder, but Schweitzer spills quite a lot of it. And in one part of it he says, I don't see how we can do this with current human technology, the dynamics that he describes. So, but this is something that the Ministry of Defence have never admitted to. This hasn't come out in their top secret files that they release. So when they say that they're not interested, they are interested in UFOs. Okay. There was a flap of black triangles in 1988 in Staffordshire. This was at a place called Cannock Chase. And there was another incident in 1997 at Sheffield. This was a black silent triangle which travelled south next to the town of Sheffield. And this has been tirelessly researched by Max Burns. And he's uncovered evidence that, again, military jets were scrambled to chase this black triangle. And one of them actually crashed. Max Burns has got aircraft parts from that crash, and he's also discovered the place where it came down. Now, there was a big cover-up over this as well, and questions were asked in Parliament about this. Okay, now a lot of what I'm going to show you from now on is witness testimony, so I'm going to give my voice a rest and just show you some of the interviews that I've been doing over the last few months.
I noticed a yellowy orangey light just to my side then. I thought, oh, that's...
Okay, I also thought I would compare notes with 3 of the UK's most prominent UFO researchers to get their angle on black triangle cases, and this is just a tip of the iceberg of their cases.
I dare say if you sorted all out the triangular reports, we'd have quite a phenomenal number of sightings of the black triangle. And they're in a marked police vehicle, and they see in the area of Northolt, Middlesex, a huge black triangular object, which he describes as the size of 3 football pitches. And I said, well, how do you know it was that big? And he says, because it was over 3 football pitches.
Well, he said it was something around that sort of size, you know, almost the size of a football pitch.
And basically, it was no noise, huge proportions, low to the ground, as low as 50 feet at one point. And it was just motionless, hanging there, and then seen for a few minutes, and then gone.
In most cases, they're either completely silent or sometimes emit a sort of low humming type sound, or sometimes.
And the amazing thing is that in the 1990s, they were coming over majestically over the landscape, as if completely impervious of what was happening below them. But they were coming over, moving it's slow. As you said before, with a light at each corner and the big light in the middle. About 24 police officers across 6 counties had basically tracked 1 or 2 objects. So initially what we thought was a very bright spherical light travelling relatively low in the sky. The object was travelling north to south, having come over the sea at Bideford Bay. We stopped and got out of our police car, and as the object approached us from directly in front of us, we realised that this object was connected in some way to 2 duller lights which were travelling behind on each side of the main bright light that was effectively in a triangular formation. It travelled fast and most strangely was completely silent. It was a clear still night. The object was enormous in dimensions overall and was like nothing we'd ever seen or experienced. Overall dimensions approximately the size of a football pitch.
It's amazing how many times people use that.
So they saw in the distance 3 sort of orangey red coloured lights in a triangular shape moving in their direction. Now as these lights got closer, they realised it was this black triangular shaped object with these lights attached, appeared to be on the underside at each corner. And they also said at a distance that it was doing this kind of weird wavy type motion. It looked like it was sort of shifting backwards and forwards. Now it's possible that it was some sort of field that was around the object that was causing this distortion, and I've looked into other cases where this same distortion effect has been seen, but there's also many cases where the distortion effect isn't seen, so you know, it's possible some kind of flight mode that they enter where it looks like this. Now this craft continued to get closer to them, and it actually came down in the road and hovered about 10 foot. It was within 40 feet of them, so it was very close. And it hovered about 10 foot off the ground, and they didn't really know what to do. They stood there staring at it.
Yeah, and bear in mind, this is just the tip of an iceberg of cases, all right? I've just presented a few of my witnesses there. Okay, let me just go back to that slide. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm not bothered whether you think these are military craft or alien craft or a combination of the two. Because what I think, and I'm talking about specifically UK cases over the last sort of 10 years, I'm not talking about the worldwide phenomena, events such as Roswell or Rendlesham, which to me clearly show some sort of outside technology, i.e. extraterrestrial possibly. I'm talking about recent UK stuff, these triangles that are being seen now. Because I think the question, who do they belong to, needs to be answered second. I think the first question we need to ask is where are they going to? Because there's far too much witness testimony to poo-poo the idea that these craft are in our skies. They're definitely in our skies. I've got so much witness testimony, you'd have to be in denial in order to say, well, I don't believe these silent triangles are in the sky. They're definitely there, right? So, as I'm saying, I think the best question to ask is where are they going when they're not in the sky? If we can find the answer to that, you can possibly find out what's inside them.
You know, there is a number of cases where where the military has tried to intercept these objects, so clearly they are interested in them.
Right.
Why would they want to intercept something if they knew what it was? Sometimes they've shown very unusual characteristics, such as cloaking, sort of materializing or dematerializing, sometimes in a clear sky. Main argument really against them being military would be just the advanced characteristics sometimes displayed.
Where they go in, what they're doing, where they're stored. Well, I suppose if you thought it was man that would created them, then they would probably be in a hangar somewhere. But I don't believe that, and I do think that they're ET, and I just think that's another aspect of ET.
But I'm trying to steer you towards, when they're not on display, where are they? Where, do you think there are bases?
Well, I think there probably are bases around the world.
ET bases?
Yeah, I think there probably are, because there's still very remote areas. I think the sea is there's been so many sightings of underwater objects.
I've had some cases where they've seen UFOs come up out of and enter the sea.
Right.
Which have been interesting, not flying triangle cases.
If these triangles have got that kind of technology, then maybe they're flying around and we just don't see them, and then they decloak, for want of a better phrase, and they're there.
If we're being visited by extraterrestrials, which I believe that we are, I believe that there's numerous species visiting the Earth, and I believe they've been here a long, long time and will continue to be here for a long, long time. I believe that there's some sort of ongoing program that they're working on with the human race, and possibly developing us. Now, it stands to reason that they would have to be somewhere. They're unlikely to just be flying around all the time. So therefore, I'd certainly look into there being a number of bases, possibly here on the planet, maybe up on the moon, that they would use to house these craft.
Right. If we consider undersea or underground bases, you wouldn't be able to pinpoint any areas that you think are more likely than others.
No. I think if I was going to have a base underwater, I'd put it in a really deep trench where nobody goes.
There's a number of cases linking with missing time or sort of even mind control. Sometimes aspects of that seem to be involved. And also I've dealt with a number of cases that directly link flying triangle craft with the abduction phenomena.
Right.
So these bases may have been on the planet for a long time, and there's a lot of talk about bases in the depth of the oceans. That would be a very, very good place to put them, because it's somewhere out of reach of human civilization.
So they're not being very specific about where they think bases might be. So what I thought I would do, I thought I would take my cases, about 40 in all, of black triangles, and just plot them on a map of the UK and see if there's a pattern emerges. Now there does seem to be a concentration of cases in the West Yorkshire-Lancashire border region. We've had common sightings in Derbyshire, Staffordshire, Lincolnshire, also East Yorkshire, but without doubt there's definitely a concentration in that area, and it is home to one of the most notorious places, Todmorden. Now, some UFO researchers, I've heard them actually describe this path here from sort of Hull across to the other side as UFO Alley. And as I said, it's home to the infamous Todmorden. So what I did was, I thought, well, let's hone in on this area and see if I can find black triangle cases specifically over the last few years. And what I did was, I went on another website that's been logging cases, and I also researched local news reports of UFO sightings. Now this map shows a series of arrows. These arrows indicate where a black triangle, silent black triangle craft has been seen moving in a particular direction. The triangles show where black triangles have been seen hovering. So we've got 9 cases in the last 2 years in and around Todmorden. This is the Pennine Way. It's a popular hiking route. Now you'll notice I've also marked on the map Ogden Reservoir, which is just a few miles west of the area. Something significant happened there in 1980. This book by Jenny Randall, written in 1983, depicts Alan Godfrey's police car and the UFO that he saw in 1980, very famous alleged abduction case of a police officer. Now in that book there's another incident which I'm very interested in, which occurred, as I say, at Ogden Reservoir. On Thursday the 14th of August 1980, Andrew Nightingales and a friend were fishing in the Ogden Reservoir at Helmshore, a small new estate near Rawtenstall about 4 miles west of Bacup. It was 8:50 p.m. Suddenly a circular row of red lights, they think about 9 in all, appeared on the surface of the water just out from the bank. Thinking it was something above them casting its reflection, they quickly glanced upwards. Nothing was there. When they looked back at the water, the lights had vanished. However, within moments, they reappeared, pulsing this time. It was quite clear that they were watching a large circular object underneath the surface of the reservoir. Naturally, they began to panic and fled from the water's edge, dropping behind their expensive fishing tackle at the mercy of any passers-by. As one of them put it afterwards, there was no way I would go back there until it was daylight. All right, so there was a lady in the nearby village also witnessed a UFO with a ring of red lights around it on that night. So we've got a UFO in this reservoir in 1980. And just look how many reservoirs there are in this area. There's loads of them, water features. Now, the area north of Todmorden, it's one of the largest unpopulated areas in the UK, and if you've been there before, the terrain is extremely mountainous. Right, there's lots of hills that craft would be able to hide behind. So, as I said, there's areas in here that are miles and miles from any road. So it would be a great location. So I'm going to speculate here. I'm speculating just based on this evidence if there's a base in the UK, because as I said, there's not a single piece of witness testimony of a silent black triangle either entering or leaving a UK military base. Okay, so if they are going somewhere on land in the UK, my guess is there's some base somewhere around here, and that they're using it to access some of the other areas that the triangles are commonly seen in.
Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. InstaShield for your quick, simple home protection. Richplanet TV is sponsored by PrepperSafeHomes.co.uk. At last, home protection that really works.
Now you might say, well, is there any good footage of triangles in the UK? Not really. I'm going to show you a little piece of footage. One of the witnesses said before that the craft was blacker than the surrounding sky. So if you try and film that, all you're going to see is the 3 points of light. You're not really going to see the structure with an average camcorder. Okay, so this was filmed in Neath in South Wales. The guy filmed it for 20 minutes at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he just saw these 3 lights hovering over his neighbour's house. And there was no reason why these lights should have been there. There's no street lights or anything like that. So this is the roof of his neighbour's house, and there's 3 lights here, and there's actually another little light on top there. So this is in 2001. He filmed them for 20 minutes at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they never moved, so he just switched his camera off and went to bed, and he says he wished he'd stayed until the morning. So as I say, you can't really see whether there's some solidness in there because it's as black as the sky. I'm not presenting this as solid evidence of black flying triangles. It's an interesting clip. Personally, I think the witness testimony is a lot more powerful than this video footage, but it's interesting nonetheless. Just sitting there above his neighbour's house. As I say, no street lights or any other lighting. Now the next clip I'm going to show you was actually broadcast on Russia Today, the news channel. So this is it's a cameraman filming some missiles going off over the war-torn area of Palestine. I think it's Palestine. And at the bottom of the screen you just see this triangular light formation, which is odd. This footage was broadcast on news channel Russia Today, brought to my attention by John Barry. It shows a triangular light formation over the war-torn area of Palestine. If this is a solid object, could it be exhibiting the cloaking abilities mentioned earlier? Is somebody monitoring the hostilities from the comfort of their advanced craft? Everyone see it? So, who knows what they are? Okay, now Dave Hodrian mentioned that he had black triangle cases linked to the abduction phenomenon. Now, my film doesn't actually go into the abduction phenomenon in any detail, but I am going to make a few comments about it. Let's just hypothesize for a moment, all right? Let's say that the black triangles are responsible for abduction. I have got one witness that is not in the film that I've interviewed on camera. He witnessed a black triangle overflying his car. He has some missing time that he can't account for, and he's on a different road, and he's not quite sure why he's driving on that road, and he has some missing memory. The following day, he has a tiny scar in the middle of his chest in the shape of a triangle, which I've got photographs of, and I've interviewed the guy. Seems like a genuine guy. Okay, so Dave Hodrian also has witnesses who claim they've got missing time having seen a triangle. Quite a lot of people have reported missing time having seen a triangle. Okay. Now, a couple of points about it. Let's just hypothesize that these triangles are abduction platforms. That's what they are. They're taking people, doing whatever, and then putting them back. Let's just say that that's what they're for. If that's the program, it would have to be covert. There's no way they could fly them out of military bases or anywhere that would be seen. They'd have to do it in secret. Whoever's doing it, I'm not saying whether it's aliens or humans or a joint program. I'm saying whoever does it, it would have to be hidden, because no one's going to agree to that, right? So the covert nature of them and the fact that no one seems to be able to pin down where they're going, to me, that ties in with the abduction phenomenon, possibly. Now, there are a number of groups in the UK that supposedly support alleged abductees, and in my opinion, they're going about their research in the wrong way, right? That what they should be doing is devising methods to provide tangible proof that abduction is going on or not. And none of them seem to do that. And I've got my own theory as to why none of them seem to do that. Okay? What they do is they'll film testimonies, some of them quite harrowing, and put them on the internet. To me, that's not helping an abductee. But it is something that I do want to get involved with and to actually get to the bottom of this, because I think it can be got to the bottom of. All right? And the first thing we need to find out is where the hell these triangles are going to. Okay. And as I said, that's going to be the focus of some of my research over the next few years. I've got ideas as to how I think we can find out whether there are bases, and also I want to speak to more of these alleged abductees and see if you can find out a method to see if a person has been taken. All right? Okay, as I mentioned, there is a UFO cover-up, because you might be sitting thinking, if you're new to this information, why the hell have I not heard about any of this on the news? Why isn't it being represented properly? Why aren't all of these cases being put in UFO documentaries and this kind of thing? Well, it's because there is a UFO cover-up, and it's very cleverly orchestrated, and it's been going on for decades. I'll give you an example. In, I think it was 2008, Channel 5 made a series of UFO documentaries called Britain's Closest Encounters. One of those was about the Berwyn case, in which the military were involved, which I've made a film about called the Berwyn UFO cover-up. Now, one of the key researchers on Berwyn is a guy called Scott Felton. He was interviewed by Firefly Productions, who made that documentary. He spent a couple of days with them in Wales, told them where the UFO was, showed them his maps, showed them all of his information. They got all that on camera. And then the day before that documentary aired, he was contacted by the producer, who said, the good news is the documentary's on tomorrow, the bad news is you're not in it. Right? So the chief commissioning editor of Channel 5 had told them to pull all of Scott Felton's testimony. Now, that wouldn't have come from the chief commissioning editor of Channel 5. That would have come from outside, probably from some MOD or intelligence agency. So you're wasting your time watching mainstream documentaries about UFOs. You really are. They're not going to tell you the truth. You're not going to see any of this black triangle stuff comprehensively documented by witnesses in mainstream documentaries. They're just going to feed you what they want you to know. And I received this note from someone a couple of years ago at a talk I was giving. I've redacted the name of the person in question because I don't want to libel myself, but in 1992 this person was approached by government people and told to keep in line and investigate UFO cases and give a rational explanation to belittle the story. And in 1991 was paid £25,000 a year from a government agency to persuade them to change their stance on UFOs and write negatively about them instead of positively, which is what they had been doing. So if you know of a UFO author that suddenly changed their stance in 1991, you can guess who was getting this money. Okay, but I'm not going to name them. Now, why are these propulsion systems always silent? Well, I think it's because they're using what's called field propulsion. And I'm going to try and explain that in basic terms. Now, because I'm trying to explain it, it doesn't mean that there aren't even more advanced methods of propulsion. All I'm going to explain here is that they have been developing field propulsion systems in secret, all right, which are silent. But that doesn't mean that all of these craft are man-made. I suspect it's a joint program. That's with the triangles. I suspect that they're being facilitated in some way. That's my own view on it. But just let's look at field propulsion in, as I say, in basic terms. If we just consider this cannonball and it's floating in the vacuum of space, miles from any planet or star, according to Isaac Newton, it will just stay there and it won't move unless acted upon by a force. So you'd have to hit it with another object in order to get it to move. Now, how space rockets manage to move is they carry a payload of fuel, and they will eject that mass out in one direction. So if they eject it out downward, the rocket moves upwards. So when a space rocket accelerates in a particular direction, it has to continually spew out mass in one direction in order to get to move in the other direction. So it's continually getting lighter all the time, which is not very desirable, really. It will be far more desirable in propulsion if you could move an object without having to eject mass out. Because obviously, once it runs out of that extra payload or fuel, you then can't change direction. Okay? A field-based propulsion system would get an object to move without ejecting mass. So let's just say that we put a planet underneath our cannonball. Immediately what would happen is the cannonball would start moving downward, right, due to the gravitational field that the planet is exhibiting. So the object's accelerating, but it's not ejecting any mass. It's accelerating because it's within a field. Now, if you allowed the cannonball to accelerate all the way down to the surface of the planet, and suddenly you just moved the planet, the cannonball would then start accelerating upwards, and it would change direction. And if you kept moving the planet to different places, you could control that ball, and you could get it to move anywhere. Now, another great advantage of such a system, if it could be developed, would be that if you were inside that ball falling to the planet, you're weightless. And when you move the planet and you accelerate in the other direction, you're still weightless, because you're falling through a gravity field the whole time. So that ball would be able to go through what appears to be 30 g changes in direction, but the people inside are weightless, right? Because they're falling through a field the whole time. So that would be a second highly desirable factor in a field-based propulsion system. So the fact that you could move the craft through incredible changes, and also the fact that you don't have to carry this mass and keep ejecting it out. All right? So it's not possible to manifest a planet for your field propulsion system, but it may be possible to manifest fields. All right? And one person who discovered this in 1928 is a guy called Thomas Townsend Brown, who got a patent for a device called a gravitator. Now, this is a series of electric plates separated by what's called a dielectric, and he would charge this up to a very high voltage, and he noticed that it could produce a force on itself, or a force appeared. So if you get two of these gravitators, you hang them from pieces of string on a rotating arm, and then apply a very high voltage, the arm would start to move around. So he was able to produce force on an object without ejecting any mass, which is really the holy grail of propulsion. All right, now, commentators such as Dr. Paul LaViolette, who used to work in the patent office, in his book Secrets of Anti-Gravity, he explains that it's possibly the Byfield-Brown effect, sometimes called an electrogravitic effect, that has been ring-fenced and used to develop some of these silent anti-gravity craft.
Aircraft companies have been getting billions of dollars from the military to develop this stuff in secret, but they sign secrecy agreements, and the military won't let them out of it. An example, and this came through a reliable source, was in the Department of Energy. He heard that Boeing wanted to declassify some of the important electrogravitics work it was doing for commercial use, and it was denied. This has been going on for decades. They've been working on this in private, sort of like Manhattan Project classification. So you're going to have all sorts of craft having been developed. I firmly believe these aren't used just around the Earth. I mean, there's actually regular flights throughout the solar system. Obviously, their next goal would be interstellar travel. I believe that projects like that are already in progress.
And if you listen to people such as Ben Rich, well, he's dead now, but he was in charge of Lockheed Skunk Works, he's made comments similar to that they've been working on interstellar travel in secret. Now, another thing that Paul Laviolette speaks about is the work of Eugene Podkletnov, who also used high voltage.
Discharges these 2 million volt pulses, the tests that he was making, through a superconducting disk, and the discharge, even though it ends up smashing against the other electrode, it keeps going, in effect, as a gravity wave out the end. It's sort of like a gravity cannon. It produces a beam of gravity shock waves that is confined. It's pretty much non-divergent. For example, they were able to knock books over at 2 kilometers and even detected its effect at 200 kilometers. So basically, with something like this, you could put a beam between here and the nearest star system and use it to propel a craft. Or you could put it on the craft and be propelling the craft with this, creating its own beam on board.
So just to expand on that, what you're saying is, say the beam is this laser pointer, it means that if it was a gravity beam generator as he's described, if I push that on the wall, I'd actually be able to lean and keep myself from falling, or knock one of you off your chairs with a gravity beam. Okay, so you can produce a force using a beam. Now, if you've got that, you could, in theory, you could use that as a leg or a prop. So anyone remember the tripods in chemistry? So if you put 3 of these gravity beam generators and pointed them downward on a triangle, because a triangle would be an obvious shape to use for stability, all right? 3 gravity beam generators that would form sort of invisible legs, if you like. So I'm just hypothesizing here is that this is what might be going on with these triangular craft. The lights in the corners maybe are not lights, maybe the light is just a byproduct of some gravity beam generator that's going down to the ground. Now, I don't know if that's the case, I'm just hypothesizing, as I said. If it was the case, it would mean that it would be inadvisable to stand underneath the corner, underneath the light, because you'd probably get crushed. And people have said to me, well, if that's the case, then they would be leaving marks in the ground. Well, yeah, possibly, it's a good point. So it's just an interesting thought. So just to come back to the finishing slide, like I said, because with this film that I've made, I'm trying to carry as many people as possible, because you make a film about UFOs and you launch straight into it saying, yeah, it's all aliens. A lot of people switch it off, right? So I'm saying, I suspect these triangles are in that group, right? But I'm happy for people to believe they're in that group or that group. I don't mind. But the point being, they're definitely in our skies, right? There's definitely a cover-up on it. So that's why I think there's some sort of facilitation of this, that it's tolerated, or there's been an agreement to allow whatever's going on with these black triangles. Okay, so thanks for listening. That's the end of the talk. I will take questions. If you want to have another break now for 10 minutes, I'll come back and answer questions, or people can give their own comments. But thanks very much for listening. So if we come back to quarter
Richplanet TV is sponsored by preppersafehomes.co.uk. InstaShield, protecting your most valuable assets.